I'm going to cover where we are now in the UK and the EU, what we've done by way of control and how that's been going, what we might be doing next by way of control because we're not out of the woods yet, and a little bit on trade. So across the UK and in the EU, so disease has been in the EU since the autumn, back in October. And it has progressed very rapidly. I've got a couple of maps coming up shortly to show you just how extensive it's got now. In the UK, the first outbreak was in December. The first wild bird tested positive in Wales in December as well. And then we've had a progression of wild bird findings across GB, only the one in Scotland, and we've had cases across England. Across the EU, though, we've had 820 cases in what is essentially one great big epidemic. And of those, we've got serious problems in some of the countries, France, Hungary, Germany, Bulgaria, where they're not only seeing incursions from wild birds affecting domestic flocks, but then spread from domestic flock to domestic flock. And that has led to really large numbers of cases, say, in southern France or in Hungary, where they're in the over 200 cases. Wild bird reports all over the area. In the UK, England, 8 outbreaks, 17 wild bird reports, but they're widely geographically spread. And this is based on people reporting found dead wild birds to us collecting them and testing them. So it's very much reactive. So this is the tip of the iceberg that we find. As I said, Scotland 1, Northern Ireland's I think beyond 1 now, and Wales has had its 1 outbreak. So this is where we started. So back in October, Hungary found avian flu H5N8 in 1 wild bird. It had previously been in Russia, and previous to that it had been circulating in Asia. And H5N8 had turned up with us in 2014, but what was coming back was a new version of H5N8, and it's behaved very differently. That's the map as it is now. This is our latest position. It's spread north, south, east and west in wild birds and domestic flocks. Essentially everywhere that it's turned up in wild birds, it's correspondingly turned up in domestic flocks, but it hasn't always led to flock spread. So a pat on the back for you guys here. Why doesn't it lead to flock spread? Because by the time we find it and we take action to stamp it out, your biosecurity measures have stopped it moving from one flock to another. So apart from 1 case, which was a game bird farm where we had 3 linked cases, there haven't been any linked cases. So I'm really pleased about that, and we need to build on that biosecurity. I'll come back to biosecurity because it's crucial. The species that we're seeing of wild birds are really important because there is a focus on aquatic wild birds. If you look at the first 3 there, ducks predominate. It's in gulls. Gulls are important because in terms of the migrations across the world, it's the waterfowl, the ducks, the geese. But gulls are domestic. So this time it's moved from the migrating species into the domestic species, and gulls can move quite long distances. And we found it in other domestic species as well, but not in the big numbers. Gulls here, we've only found it in 1. But across Europe it's much more predominant. You'd be foolish to think it's not predominant in gulls here, we just haven't picked it up. And then you go down and there's other birds that are almost incidental findings, and the little brown jobs in the back garden are not a really significant factor. Swans are starting to show their heads. They always do in avian flu outbreaks. It's because of the way we survey wild birds. They're big and white and obvious when they're dead, so they get picked up. So we find it. What have we had? Here are all our cases, starting in fattening turkeys. This was when we had already, so our first action, and some would say, and we did, we were seeing the disease progress across Europe when we had wild bird findings in the north of France. Before France was really taking off, we really concentrated on the threat we faced and brought in place the prevention zone measures on the 6th of December. Those are maintained till now, and I'll come back to that. But requiring birds to be housed or otherwise kept separate from wild birds across the country against this risk spreading across Europe and an as yet unknown impact on us. Later in December we get the first case in Lincolnshire. Housed birds, they were housed. Then on to a backyard flock in Carmarthenshire. So we worry about backyard flocks. Epidemiologically they're much less likely to spread the disease onwards, but every case is a case. So in terms of our disease control and our reputation, every case is a case. So we want backyard flocks to do the right thing as well, not least because their birds die if they don't stop them getting infected. And on into further cases, and I mentioned the linked game bird premises. What I would say about all of these cases is they illustrate a point, which is that actually the protection against this disease hinges on how good you are at stopping disease getting into your flock. You all work on that all of the time, and you're constantly tested. By the endemic diseases that you all face, you vaccinate against, you have to deal with when they arise. That barrier against disease is what is really stopping us having avian flu really taking off. So again, we're at a high level of threat. We've only had 9 cases. The cases we have, in every single one, we can point to biosecurity that you wouldn't recognise as best practice. So that's an area where, regardless of what else we do, we need to be as good as we can. Very high mortality. One of these cases, we were looking at turkeys. They were dying in front of our inspecting officer's eyes. We had pretty much all of the birds dead on this premise before we could instigate culling. Just as an aside, before you cull, you need to be very well prepared. And even though this is a disease, and this is carried very effectively by the press, that Public Health England says isn't a threat to public health, Food Standards Agency says isn't a threat to the food chain, but when you're dealing very closely with infected birds, you have to be precautionary. So we have to work with Public England to get ready, protect our people, protect your people if they're helping us catch. And that means that mortality can really overtake the process of moving into cull. This is a shed with only 1 live bird left in it looking at you. Game birds, variable clinical signs across the 3 premises. We had 1 very severely affected, others not so severely affected. It shows how it can get into premises under certain sorts of husbandry and hide away. So it's there if you're alert, if you know your disease picture and you can see the changing trends. And again, congratulations, you do. Your vets do. Reporting is generally very good, but it can creep up on you and clinical signs can vary. We've worried a lot about ducks. We've seen both high fatalities in ducks and low clinical signs, so we've got to watch those as well.